Hello and welcome along to the RTÉ Rugby podcast, our final podcast of the 2025 Guinness Men's Six Nations. Ireland signing off the campaign with an underwhelming win against Italy in Rome. Only enough for third place in the table after England hammered Wales and France beat Scotland to secure the title. Later on in the podcast, Hannah O'Connor will be joining me to look ahead at the Women's Six Nations, which starts this weekend. Ireland at home to France in Belfast. Before that, I've Bernard Jackman and Johnny Murphy with me recapping Ireland's Men's Six Nations campaign. And Bernard, to look at the campaign as a whole, I think the last two seasons are probably a good illustration of like tiny margins adding up to something bigger along the way. 12 months ago, Ireland win four games, probably 30 seconds and just one bad exit away from a Grand Slam against England. And ultimately, they still go on and win the championship. This year, Ireland also win four games, finished third. But there are no hard luck stories or what ifs. Like when you look at the body of evidence over these five games, third place is probably a fair result for what Ireland have got out of it.
Yeah, I think so. I think my overriding reaction on the final whistle in Rome was I kind of hope we don't win the championship just after that performance. Obviously I would love us to win the championship, but just kind of the balloon was burst a little bit. It was just a lethargic, kind of inaccurate performance. And if you were a neutral there or Italian fan, you'd be saying, God, Italy have salvaged something. They've played some good rugby against a good Irish team, and their discipline let them down. Whereas, we obviously had opportunities not to score, but we didn't take them, which has been um, kind of a recurring theme over this Six Nations. Our red zone, as you pointed out on social media last week, has been quite poor. Held up over the line, being a big part of that. You couldn't even include the Beelum double movement as kind of symptomatic of that, where just not as patient or as fluid as we would need to be. And yeah, I think England and France have got better during the tournament. I think France, to be fair, they're fiercely lucky not to win a Grand Slam. I mean, it's nearly a Grand Slam, type dominance of this competition for them without a Grand Slam. But I think they'd be really happy where they are. And I think England, just with that big win in Wales and kind of how they seem to take off the shackles from a attacking point of view and had a go and the change ups, Fraser Dingwall coming in, Roebuck, Freeman at 13, George Ford showing that he still has something to offer off the bench. I think he'd be Borthwick and Galtier would be far happier than Andy Farrell and Simon Easterby. And it was interesting after the game, Easterby was asked, does he think Ireland have progressed or regressed? And took him, a few seconds to answer. And I think probably based on the way the tournament ended with France and Italy, it's definitely lots to fix there.
And John, I suppose the disappointing part is it started quite well. Like when we went into that break after the Scotland game, you were looking at the game against England where they were patchy in the first half and then just blew them away in the second. And against Scotland, it was a pretty comfortable win aside from maybe a 10-minute spell either side at halftime. But it was a game that they never ever looked like losing. Routine win. They had those two in the bag, both bonus points. And just from there, nothing really seemed right. Went through the motions against Wales. A result that's probably aging poorer as well when you consider what Scotland and England have done to them in terms of pulling their defence apart at the very least. And then that second half against France and just the whole malaise of that 80 minutes in Rome.
Yeah, but I do think you come back to kind of the England game and the tries they gave up late on to give England that bonus point. Toward the end of the game, that was a bit lackluster too. Yes, they had their kind of period of dominance. And we saw that in the autumn series where they'd have a period of dominance for 10, 15 minutes and they'd drop off. They had those periods for longer in this championship, in the Six Nations, but then those drop-offs were really critical at a time in terms of, if you look at the table and what those what England got out of that game, where that put them on the table and what opportunity that gave them going forward. And then the Welsh game, as you say, it hasn't aged great because we very much felt that, there was a bounce with everything going on in Welsh rugby. all the emotion that was associated with that. But we just seem to have really kind of struggled in the last two games. I think this game it was on Saturday was very much a clear kind of hangover, if you want, in a way where, as Birch sort of said, the bubble had been burst a bit and it's very hard emotionally to get back up and then put in a real clinical performance. And it just looked like, for me, it looked like, confidence, a mixture of kind of confidence that had been taking a big knock the previous week with the last 30 minutes against France, and then also the opportunity to try and force those. Like, when do Ireland, ever force those offloads in those spaces, particularly in their three-man shape-off nine, where they're forcing those tip-ons and they're not going to hand. And that just, as you say, coming out in a really kind of lethargic one, where I felt at the end of the game, as hard as it was to watch, they were kind of lucky that, on the balance of power, probably he did probably deserve to get more out of what they got out of it.
And I suppose, Bernard, then, like, that was part. You could see how the confidence started to seep over the tournament. And as we kind of said, that game against Italy, they did really look like a team low on confidence in Rome on Saturday. It's funny, even just like talking about like a basic stat. I was just looking through one of the stat packs the other day, and it kind of jumped out at me. Ireland conceded 4 penalties on Saturday. If you had
Yeah.
said to an Ireland team, okay, you're going away to Rome, it might be a little tricky game on paper. If you told most supporters before the game, don't worry, Ireland will only concede 4 penalties over the course of the 80 minutes, you're fairly confident it's going to be a routine win. Like, it's eliminating so many opportunities for Italy to attack. In theory, it is keeping Ireland on the front foot so much more, but they just never looked comfortable.
No, and both sides of the ball. I mean, that's like defensively. Defensively, we gave Italy a lot of way inroads into the game. Now, I think Italy, in fairness, like Menicello and Brex and Capozzo, Garbisi, they're good footballers and they've got pace and they know how to attack, and they exploited our kind of urge to blitz kind of at the wrong time. It was a funny defensive performance. I actually felt we were more aggressive on the edge against Italy than we had been through all the tournament, and we got punished for that because we weren't as connected as we need to be on the inside, and got hurt. So that would frustrate Easterby, because I thought our defense last year was a big part. I thought our attack last year had dropped off from 2023, but I thought our defense was very consistent. Everyone on the same page. It's not a Leinster model, but it was effective. And obviously, I think we've got hurt quite easily in this competition, far easier than we would like. And then, obviously, from an attacking point of view, just giving up those. Our penalty count was down. Like, 4 is amazing, and I'm sure it was a big focus because the discipline against France was poor. But then the handling errors, the turnovers,
And that's an issue. And that's an issue going back to November as well. The
yeah,
handling errors and the turnovers.
yeah, and like sometimes not really under massive pressure. Some of the basic things that we would take for granted. And the challenge is, it kind of looks like we're trying to play the same way. Like, it doesn't look like we're trying to play like France, which is, short, sharp bursts. Even Wales better on transition and counter attack than on phase attack. It looks kind of like how we've been attacking in 2022, 23, 2024. It's just getting less effective. And I don't think it's all down to the fact that teams know what we're doing now. It's just our execution, and our timing is a little bit off. I think our confidence is a little bit rocked. And all in all, it's making us pretty predictable. Whereas the way Ireland want to play, I think, is far from predictable, because you have so many options around the ball carrier. So that will frustrate Andrew Goodman. But I think the best we've ever played was 2023, I think, attacking wise. And Sexton and Farrell were together there. And I think Sexton is proven to be difficult to replace in terms of someone who makes sure everybody else knows their job to the nth degree and is in the right position. Like, you're seeing players, not options to pass because they're half a meter too far away or too flat. You're just seeing a multitude of different errors, but it's all around that lack of real detail, and that will frustrate them. Particularly against it. Like, the reality is, we made Italy look really good defensively, and for sure they improved. But like, 7 days beforehand, England ripped them apart pretty easily. 7 days before that, France put 70 on them at home. So like that was the worry for us, was that we made a team who have struggled to defend well, look like a good defensive side. And which? Did they find the best defensive performance of the season, or did we make it easy for them?
Well, allied with that, you can also factor in Ireland made Wales look like an incredibly
Yeah.
impressive defensive team as well. And you look at what happened against England. Now, maybe look, you can caveat that, I suppose, by saying it was the last game against England, and maybe they were a bit deflated, and a few other bits and pieces. But Johnny, on that wider point of the Ireland attack, kind of what do you make of what Bernard was saying there?
Yeah, look, I agree. I do feel that they're just that kind of, and you said at the start that small margins, they're just a half a foot off, and like the big thing, as Bert said, like the whole thing around the Ireland attack for the last number of years is that everyone is in movement across the pitch all at the same time. So whether you run, pass, or kick the ball, you find the space. And with how they're set up, they have, if one, if not two guys in the 15 at all times. So if teams are bunched defensively, then you can crossfield kick to those athletes like Sheehan and those guys that are really good in that position. But we just seem to be losing the battle in between, because we turn into then a kind of same way side, carrying aggressively, and we don't have that necessarily that big massive power game that France have to kind of win those collisions for long periods of time, to allow kind of real quick ruck balls. So you have to try and move the point of contact a bit more. And it seemed like on Saturday they were trying to do that, but then their accuracy on those short tip-on passes. How many like times have you seen three or four of those tip-on passes go to ground? Or there was a couple of balls thrown into touch. Crowley had one. Prendergast had another, where they're trying to force that position to get into that 15, to get into their shape and then play. But when they don't have that accuracy, they need to generate, go forward in a power game, and they're probably just not big enough to take those sides on. And that kind of allows teams get in, slow the ball down, and then we look really lackluster.
Well, like obviously you mentioned Jack Crowley and Sam Prendergast there as people who threw poor passes at the weekend. Um, is it a simple enough solution to say that in 2023 Johnny Sexton was playing, and it's arguably Ireland's greatest ever rugby player, was orchestrating things at out half, and for the last 2 years Ireland have been betting in new out halves. How much, Bernard, do you think that actually factors into it?
I think it does, and obviously we have to move on from Johnny Sexton. We have to find a way, but I think it has a massive influence. And like we have to understand, he's like having an extra coach on the field, and his ability to get people into the exact right shape that they practice at training under fatigue, call the right option, be out the back of those forward pods, that ball movement, make the next pass a pass that puts someone else on a soft shoulder. That's what he did. And look, this has happened to most great teams where the main actor departs, whether it's England and Johnny Wilkinson, or whether it's Alan Jones and Wales, or when DuPont doesn't play for France, even though we saw it the weekend against Scotland, they had enough of collective brilliance to beat them. But in the past, France have been so reliant on him, and we were very reliant on Johnny Sexton. And it's a very difficult task to find someone who can do that, particularly
Yeah.
two young tens who are learning their trade. Plus, without Andy Farrell there for this tournament, and also I would say, Neil, I think we have to take into account that we were probably set up the best last year to retain our Six Nations, because bar Johnny leaving, we didn't, and RG leaving, we actually didn't have massive turmoil or change, or we didn't really start our cycle
Yeah.
World Cup the year after the World Cup. Whereas,
We're kind
England
of
brought in
we're kind of
Felix.
we're kind of only starting the World Cup cycle now.
That's
If
fine.
if you
Yeah.
factor, the three lads who are retiring, this is the biggest level of turnover there has been since the World Cup.
And I think, 2 years out, that's okay. You know what I mean?
Mm.
The challenge is if you try and do it like one year out from the World Cup. So, and I think, Farland and the RFU had been aware of this, it was probably a gamble worth taking because to win a third Six Nations looked potentially still there after Wales, even though we won a Triple Crown. So it hasn't been a disastrous Six Nations by any manner of means. But the challenge is now is are we going to start the World Cup cycle now? Are we going to adapt our game plan? So like I would say the game has changed. I think the game has changed over the course of Six Nations. In my memory, there's never been as many law adjustments or trials, in season, and that's affected how the game looks now. Affects how the game looks, and like some of those things that stand out to me are like contestables now. It has a massive influence on the game. Your ability to win contestables kicked onto you, or your ability to win contestables back. And actually, Ireland's high ball work hasn't been as good as it needs to be. That's fine. That's an area we can fix. Brian Fenton was in working with them. Sometimes it takes a little while for that, but that's an area that let us down. I think the referees are
I do think on that one though, Birch,
Yeah.
that one, it's also important how you attack and transition in that space then. And that's something that France are incredible at. So when they do win that ball, or they win it attackingly or they win it defensively, they win those collisions in the air defensively. It's how they rip teams aside in that transition and in that kick battle. Before the rule came in, winning the kick battle was advancing, two or three phases up the pitch. So if you're in the 22, trying to get the ball back on the halfway line, where now it's nearly it's like a set piece in the sense of your transition attack. You win that bouncing ball. It's where do you go off that? And that's kind of hard to coach as well without doing a load of unstructured stuff, which then was probably taken away. And the French historically are ingrained in that, unstructured, just duet type of play. So I do think our transition in those kick battles, I think that's a big area of improvement that we can get a good chunk of change out when we do nail that down.
Yeah, I agree with you, Johnny. I think if you look at what team is best at that in Ireland, it's Munster. Why Prendy, spent a lot of time in France, so they don't have the same cattle that France have, Toulouse or Bordeaux have, but they practice that a lot. That they see that as being a way that they can avoid the heavy artillery, that they don't have. So again, I think Ireland will never be as good as France at that. I think they don't have the profile of players. It's not part of our way we're taught how to play the game. But yeah, we have to develop that. I think my concern was actually we're actually losing a lot of those collisions in the air, and that's leading to the opposition being on the front foot or us having to defend a set piece further up the field. So that's something that we're going to have to adapt to. The bench thing, obviously England went 6-2 exclusively. I think the Six Nations, France went 7-1. It's not new, but it's the whole effect it's having. So historically, data-wise, since 2016, the Six Nations, the quarter the most points were scored were the last quarter, and the third quarter was actually quite low. France, by bringing 5 or 6 players on together around the 45-minute mark, have won two big games in that period. And again, it's how you use your bench. You don't have to go 7-1. I don't think Ireland will go 7-1, but is it more beneficial to go with 4 replacements at once at a certain time, maybe a bit earlier than normal, and then rather than drip feeding one in at a time or 2 in at a time? That's something that I think all the data analysts would be watching England and France and saying, okay, we mightn't have 7 or 6 forwards, but how can we use our bench better? Because in this Six Nations, the third quarter is now as lucrative as the last quarter, right? So that's interesting. The hybrid player, I mean, Eddie Jones was laughed at for saying Jack Nowles could play back row. But now it looks like you probably need to have at least one hybrid player if you're going to go 6-2 anyway. Or is there a benefit of that? So Jeju, Ben Earl played in the centre. Borthwick said after the match he's considering starting Ben Earl as a centre at some stage, to obviously get game time into him. I spoke to Felix Jones. Like, they were very lucky to have a fellow called Quagga Smith who played sevens, and they regularly used him. But again, have we any players who could be hybrid players? You know, if this is the way the game is going, yeah, ideally you'd be at the forefront of it, but you don't want to be you don't want to be left behind either. And that's interesting for me. And what else? Yeah, I think they're the ones that stand out. What can we do in terms of making sure that we're able to turn games with our bench as well? Because I see them having a bigger influence.
I think that's really important because we can now, in this cycle leading up to the World Cup, the Lions obviously is a big thing this year. You can then develop, you can be proactive in developing those individuals and also developing your tactical kind of what you want to do on a bench. On a benching, it was said on the TV watching the French game, do France go early with 3 or 4 at the same time? So you can be proactive rather than a year out being reactive, So I think that these are all things that over the next kind of 2-3 months through the summer and then into autumn series, you'll see where, when Andy Farrell comes back in, that all the coaching staff, that they're going to try and have to be proactive in terms of that and picking guys out that might be in that, hybrid position in, as 19, 20, 21-year-olds. So by the time that, or someone just out of 20s, 21, 22, that 24, 25, they've had a period of 12 to 18 months where these are options for those players.
Jamie Osborne could play in the back row, couldn't he? I mean, he's playing everywhere else, and he's big enough, isn't he?
Yeah.
Well, he certainly has the size to do it. Yeah.
It is interesting, actually. You were saying, like, talking about the flow of the substitutions and when to make them in a bunch, maybe at an earlier stage or whatever, because it is something that just popped up in my own head during the Six Nations, that you can almost, going into an Ireland game, you can almost predict when 5 or 6 of those 8 players are going to come on almost to the minute. Probably at tight head, Finlay Bealham and Thomas Clarkson would have swapped around the 50-minute mark. A couple of minutes later, Peter O'Mahony and Jack Conan would swap, whether one was starting or one was on the bench. Probably one of those was, and they were also going to change one of the second rows around that point. Then, depending on the rest of the match, loose head, Andrew Porter's leaving with between 5 and 10 minutes to go, depending on how the results going. Similar with Dan Sheehan coming off, if it's going to be Gus McCarthy coming on or Rob Herring. So there's just a lot of it feels very, very prescribed, and maybe in a few positions you aren't even giving yourself enough scope to get much of an impact.
Yeah, look, this is something new. I think we all thought only the South Africans would go 7-1, maybe because we don't play them every season. It's kind of forgotten about, but like they went for a risk. They also had Dion Fury, who obviously was a hybrid,
Yeah.
macro and hooker, so they could afford to have one hooker. They didn't have to carry Hooker on the bench, and obviously he had to come on early in the World Cup final, etc. But yeah, the replacements and the use of replacements is obviously something that looks like it's going to be more and more important. But it's having that depth, and I think, to be fair to Farrell, it needs to be, like, if you look at the bench, Clarkson, we're trying to get minutes into him. He's not proven at test level yet, and still to win a championship. I think for the French game they went with Herring because he's the safe option. But then they brought Gus McCarthy back in, who's super talented, but again he hasn't had a huge amount of test rugby. So Jack Boyle, obviously, again, looks like he's there to Cian Healy, and a very talented player, but hasn't had a huge amount of time. So now the challenge is to get those players that are going to replace the Cian Healys and the Conor Murrays and the Peter Mahonys and the Keith Earls and Johnny Sextons, etc. And I think that's happened with Sam and Jack. Both of them have now had a fair bit of test rugby. Is to get them to a level next year, the year after. So World Cup time, we have the majority of our players have 30 plus caps and know exactly the role they're gonna play. Like I find it fascinating how the box have, they spend such a big focus on these alignment camps, where they bring in 60, 70 players, and they don't even sometimes train. They just talk about the project and the challenge and the goal and their role in that, and what they need to do to be part of it.
I feel like that was something that occasionally did happen under Ireland. I have memories of maybe pre-Farrell where there would be like I have it in my head there was like a mini camp before Christmas for a good few years.
Yeah, there was.
Where,
Yeah, there was. Yeah.
40 odd players would come in just for 2 days. There wasn't any big camp going on, but it was just get people in the door and have a chat and run through some bits.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and like even in my time, like Decky in 2010, about 6 months out of the World Cup, I think there was there was a 1 day camp in Carton. I think it was pre Six Nations around. Look, guys, here's the top. I think there's about 52 of us there. Here's the top 52. This is what's going to be expected of ye. Some of you aren't going to feature in the Six Nations, but that doesn't mean you're not going to potentially be in the World Cup squad. And it was kind of there was clear alignment across. We didn't do a whole lot of rugby or anything, but there was clear alignment around, well, okay. And you kind of had an idea looking around the room where you were within the depth chart.
Hmm.
And that gave you a bit of clarity in, okay, well, I need to do this. And when we play our interpros and I'm going to be up against, Fergus McFadden or whatever, then you're like, okay, well, I need to make sure that I'm in a good spot here when they play. So it did give individuals that clarity. So it was something that has been, I'm sure, and those camps go on all the time without people kind of knowing they are going into 1 and 2 day camps, 3-4 times a year.
Neil, just I think we get 20% better with Farrell being back. And I know
Yeah.
November was a bit clunky. But I think that it
I just
probably
wanted to
hasn't.
ask you on that, Birch, how, given your experience in that kind of high level coaching, how big of an issue is it losing your head man for not for like a day doing interviews or whatever, but
Yeah.
for a long period of time? Like, how stretched is someone like Simon, Andrew, and Paulie? Like, how stretched do they get across a normal week, given that they're actually they're down a physical body for a 10-week block of a season?
I think, look, they'd be working really hard anyway. It's just having that focal point that, someone who tops and tails meetings. Like, he's unbelievably good at getting players to the right emotional place. Like, probably one of the best performances we've had in the Six Nations in recent years is beating France in 2023. And that was the week he brought in O'Driscoll and Craig Doyle and Davy Irwin, around what it means to represent the island, and the Ulster players and things like that. So, like, at this top level, when you've played as many, like I just mentioned, young lads were trying to get to 30 caps, but overall we have a lot of experience in that squad. So Robbie Henshaw, Gary Ringrose, Bundy Aki, Hugo Keenan, James Lowe, Gibson Park, Jack Cohn, etc. They have been in Irish squads a long time. Test rugby, it's not their first time going to Rome. It's not it's not their first time playing France in the Viva. So, and often it's the mindset that makes everything else look better. You know what I mean? Like, I've no doubt that they had a good game plan against France. I've no doubt that they work on a good attacking shape against Italy. But it's that mindset of bringing it all together. And maybe everybody knows he's not in the building, but he's coming back. It's just enough to drop off slightly. Maybe it's gone a little bit stale without him. And like you mentioned margins, Neil, but it doesn't take a lot to go from being 10 out of 10 to 8 out of 10, and that means you don't win the Six Nations, And I think if he wasn't coming back, I'd be more worried. I genuinely like the way players talk about how good Camp is when he's there. And this isn't a net criticism of the rest, but that's why he's been paid big money. That's why he's a British and Irish Lions coach. That's why we've signed him up for 2027. Like, he has a massive influence. And then the other question is, was it the right thing to let him go? That's probably and I actually believe it is, because I think he'll come back. Now, I thought he would come back re-energized, and I still think he will. But part of the reasons I think it's the right thing was I thought there was going to be a lot of other nations coaches there, so he's picking up things from England, he's picking up things from Scotland, he's picking up things from Wales, and he'll come back, even better. And obviously now there's a lot of reports that it's going to be a very Irish coaching staff. So that would make it less positive for me, to be honest. Even though I wouldn't begrudge any of those Irish coaches the opportunity, and Farrell totally has the right to pick who he wants. But I think from an Irish point of view, it's really important that we have some senior coaches on this summer tour, and also I think for him to bring the best of Wales, the best of Scotland, the best of England together will be better for far long term as well.
I do want to just come back around to the attack, because there were some stats I wanted to bring up, which I just found really, really interesting, and I think kind of illustrate the way Ireland's attack has gone. So obviously, scoring from turnovers just hasn't been a big thing for Ireland in the last few years. And Johnny, obviously, you were talking about the fact that, like, France are obviously the masters now with the way the kicking game is. There's a lot more, I suppose, unstructured play developing, and you had your opinion that France were scoring the most tries from that. You were absolutely correct. I have it here in front of me. France scored 30 tries. 11 of those came off turnover or transition. But from an Irish point of view, Ireland scored 17 tries in the Six Nations. Just one of those came off turnover ball, which was, in terms of percentages, 6%, joint lowest with Wales, or it was the lowest. Ireland had 6% of their tries off turnover ball. England, France, Italy, and Scotland are all above 30% on that number. Now, that's not a massive shock. That hasn't been the way Ireland have scored in the last few years. It was also the lowest, 5%, last year as well. But coupled with that is the drop off that in Ireland's multi-phase attack, which we have seen just wearing teams down over the years. So if you go back to the 2023 Grand Slam year, 20% of Ireland's tries in that tournament, 4 out of 20, came from 10 or more phases of play where they would eventually score a try. Last year, 27% of their tries came from 10 or more phases of play. This year, they didn't score a try after 10 phases of play. They scored 2 tries after 8 phases, which is down to 12%. And then also as well, 71% of the tries Ireland scored in this Six Nations came within the first 3 phases. Last year, it was 53%, and in 2023, it was 45%. So the trend that's emerging there is that if Ireland aren't scoring within those first 3 phases, they're not really likely to be scoring at all. And it seems maybe the attack is so prescribed that, or not so prescribed. Are they struggling to kind of think on the hop once they get out into that unstructured bit of play?
I think that there's probably a coaching element to that, in the sense of kind of styles. I do think Andrew Goodman is very orientated around first phase and power plays, and kind of the stats show that, where there was a bit more multi-phase kind of focus with Mike Catt along those, where Joe Smith, if you went through probably those stats from Joe Smith, they're very kind of prescribed, and down to even with Joe, like his power plays went for nearly 6 phases, and guys had to be in the left or right barrel in the 4th, 5th, and 6th. So like it was quite prescribed then. That all changed probably under Mike Catt, but I do think there is probably a coaching mindset around that. And chatting to a few people, there probably is a real kind of power play orientated with Andrew Goodman. And even then, in Leinster now, it's kind of, there's a bit more kind of flow to what Tyler's trying to do, and kind of very similar plays, power plays off 5, 6, 7-man lineouts. You can call the same play, but everyone is real. Everyone is really clicked in terms of their movement, and that they're all options and all multi-phase options across the board. So I do think there is a bit of a kind of coaching shift in that. So whether that's a World Cup plan or that they get that, and then they can kind of layer on what is fundamental, like there's a foundation of multi-phase there, because they're all being coached that within the province anyway. So there is a bit of a coaching element to that too.
Yeah, just on that, Neil, definitely the way the game has gone, it's about short bursts of speed and power with the ball. Okay, like we would be the team who are most geared towards building long multi-phase attacks, but we obviously haven't seen a lot of that because it's been breaking down for us. But the others are set up to hurt you quite quickly when they get the ball, or even offset play. Like you'll see a lot of attacking kicks. Like even at the weekend, I don't know if you noticed, but like Roebuck was exclusively open side winger because he's so good in the air that they were able to. They were looking to use him quite early on crossfield kicks or contestables. The challenge for us is at the moment, and we don't look like we have a huge amount of pace,
Mm.
and more importantly, we actually don't have a natural second receiver. Okay, so that's why so much pressure is on our 10. Like Hugo Keenan is class at what he does, but he's not a natural second receiver to step up as a playmaker on the blind side, and hence you see Mac and James Lowe having a roving role, and Mac both had amazing impacts on the game at the weekend, attacking wise, because and it showed why we missed them against France, but they're not really players who like James Lowe is capable of going down the left wing, bouncing someone, passing back inside. He does that incredibly well. But they're not really second receivers like Blair Kinghorn is. Blair Kinghorn has played a load at 10.
Mm.
Ramos has played a load at 10.
Yeah, Finn
Um,
Russell and
Tom Jordan. Tom Jordan.
yeah, yeah,
yeah, Tom
yeah.
Jordan has played a load at 10. Blair Murray is a danger on his own because of his speed and footwork if he steps up at first receiver down the blind side. So that's something that again it hampers your attack. It makes you very focused on where the 10 is. And again, that's something that's not natural to certain players. It's not happening in a club game. It doesn't need to happen in a club game for certain teams to win. But it makes Andrew Goodman's job harder. It makes Andy Farrell's job harder when he comes back to be a multi-phase team. Now, he may be able to put all those corrections in place
Mhm.
and we get back to being that type of team and we're an outlier. And that's our point of difference. But the challenge is the way the game is going is that real out and out pace is there's a premium on that. That is having a big influence on games, and we don't look like we have lots of out and out pace, and one or two can make a big difference.
Is there
Um,
is there out and out pace there coming through? Are there players who've been in that 20s bracket over the last couple of years that do have that real natural pace?
Tommy Tommy Bryan has a fair bit of pace, but he's very unlucky. He just his body keeps breaking on him. So I think Leinster would be keen. He's very physical defensively. Ballycloone has it. Stockdale had it, but
Has it? Yes, Balakoon has it too.
Ballycloone has it. But again, they have to have other they have to have other strengths as well.
Mm.
And that's not like B.A. Barry's weakness is the high ball, but yet defensively, he's actually decent in defense. Sean Edwards has him. His tackle technique is class. And he's so good. He's so good the other side that you can kind of carry him. And France involved him a lot. So like it just needs to be. Well, yeah, we haven't. There's not a huge amount of pace in the country. I would say, like on in all the provinces. I haven't seen anyone in 20s level who's just blown me away
Mm.
with acceleration. So maybe that's not something we can chase, but that's what's happened. The other thing, sorry, I'm jumping around here, but the other trend which is interesting is England picking 3-7s, and the impact that has had on games as well, and the jackal threat that they had that other countries didn't really have. France had it when they brought Marchand off the bench, but in general, that's something that is interesting as well. That do you sacrifice line out to have three really athletic players who can make a lot of tackles and be effective at the breakdown? Do we have 3-7s in Ireland that are at that level again? But that's just something that when I look over my notes in the Six Nations, it's something I never thought England would do because Borthwick is such a slave to lineouts.
Mm.
But I'm not saying we should be copying England, but it's something that had an impact on the tournament in terms of performances.
I do think that rugby is going in cycles, and you look at some of those really good Kiwi teams. You look at the 12s they had, be it Luke McAllister, Aaron Major, and the wingers that they had, Joe Rockakoko. They had that Kiwi style second 5-8. Leinster are after going to get one of them, and they've got the power in Solana and sorry,
Simon and
there's
Mount.
Simon, yeah, and so like they have that power, but that Kiwi style second 5'8" is something that is, you look at, and Birch's name, you look at Marcus Smith and Finn Smith, you look at all the other teams, they have those players that pop up, and you see Ireland are trying to do that. There is times where in the games where Robbie Henshaw will be at first receiver and Sam or Sam has been in behind, or Jack Crowley's been in behind the shape then off 10. But as Bert said, that's not natural to those players. So we have to try and find those guys that are there. There are those younger guys in those space like Paddy Taylor, one guy, Coach Jack Deegan coming out of Ross Gray. They have the ability to be those guys that have the power that they can carry, but also be that second ball player that can allow, that can open up the teams in those multi-phase things. Pace, we're not the quickest of nations overall, like, maybe 400 meters, but under that, we don't have very many sprinters in our athletics department. So, like, it is something that, we're going to have to try and do it out, I think. But we do have ball players within those age groups coming through, and that can be that within the provinces.
Let's finish up on a couple of positives. What are the positives to take out of this campaign? What are you coming away from grasping onto heading up into the summer?
Triple Crown, developed some new players. So got game time into the ones I mentioned earlier: Sam, Gus, Thomas Clarkson, Jack Boyle. We now know where we need we'll be exposed to, five tough games, and we've had chinks in our armory exposed. But that's great. I actually think it's going to drive a rejuvenation over the next 2 years. It's going to kickstart this cycle. We got a chance to send off Pete and Keane and Connor properly. Obviously not with a win, but just to send them off properly. And I think that's important for every player in Ireland to know, if you leave that jersey in a good place, you'll be looked after and recognised at the end. I think that's a very strong motivating factor, and I think it's a big part of what Farrell's about. And we got Simon and Paul and Goodman an opportunity to develop their own coach at Fogs without a mentor there, without the head man there. So they'd be the positives for me. But I don't think it was an overall positive campaign. But yeah, they're the positives I see.
And Johnny, looking at the summer then, like, I think we can almost start to piece together who are going to be the uncapped players given a chance, of, like, barring injuries, obviously, because you look at over the course of the weeks, the uncapped fellas and young players who've come in, like the development players at the start, whether it's Hugh Cooney, Ben Murphy, you've had Diarmuid Mangan in there, you've had Shane Bolton, Tom Ahern has been in there, Gavin Coombs has come back in. They have drafted in a lot of players. Tommy O'Brien is another one we mentioned earlier. They've drafted in a lot of players who've either been out of squads or on the fringes of squads over the last couple of years into this group over the Six Nations. Now, none of those players really came in anywhere close to getting a cap during this campaign, but it almost feels like it was kind of planned out from the start that, okay, each week we'll bring in a couple here, a couple there, two or three here this week, just with the idea of having those guys in the camp in the summer and pushing for caps.
Yeah, I think that happens every Lions year. The opportunity to bring those guys on tour, give them a sample of what a fully fledged first team tour is, and then bring them back in the autumn series. Guys that do well will pick up some caps in the autumn series, and then develop them over the next 2 years and give them the opportunity. That's the luxury of the cycle that they're in. And I think that's a good thing. All these learnings, whatever you say about the word, for all of those players are going to be a good thing. Those negatives that Birch has spoken about, saying they're probably all the positives when they look back and they sit down and they analyze them, because they can put things in place where, as I said at the start, they can be proactive now over the next 12, 18 months, so that they're not being reactive, 9 months out of the World Cup. And that transition and giving guys that experience, that's what the next 12 to 18 months is gonna be about. And um, you know, uh, a summer tour where they're going to be, they're going to be under the pressure of playing for their country, and knowing what it's like without those other guys who are gone from a coaching capacity or playing capacity in the Lions. That experience is invaluable for all of those lads.
Neil, you mentioned someone there, Shane Bolton. He
Mm.
actually is someone who could step up to be a regular part of Team Ireland. Not saying he's going to replace Mac or James Lowe, but he's interesting. He could be a test match influencer, I think. There's
Just
something
it
about
just
him.
needs to avoid those injuries.
No, 100%. But
It's just been what's
I
holding
think
them
when you
back
see
so
him
much.
play, when he's fit, he kind of, like, certainly for me, being in the sports ground, seeing him live, seeing the impact he can have on games.
Mm.
I think he might have a point of difference, and that's what you need. Like, we have lots of really, really good rugby players playing professional rugby in Ireland. But what we need as you step up another level is they have to have a point of difference. They have to be able to impact games in a positive way, and I think he has something that Ireland could use, particularly because we are quite structured. You could bring him into the game to get you on that front foot. And I think he's quite a good finisher as well. So you mentioned under 20s. I'd say he's probably more likely to be the next one in quite quickly, and certainly they'll want to have a look at him over the summer tour.
Yeah, I think he'll certainly be in if he can just avoid any more injuries between now and the end of the campaign. Fellas, we'll leave it there for now. A reminder that our chat with Hannah O'Connor is coming up next. Loads of rugby coming up on RTÉ over the next few days, though. Friday evening, Munster awaited Glasgow Warriors live on RT2 and RT Player. And a double header then on Saturday. Bulls against Leinster kicking off at 3 o'clock, followed by Ospreys versus Connacht at 5:15. Both of those, as I say, live on RT2 and RT Player. Now, turning our attention to the Women's Six Nations, I'm delighted to be joined by former Ireland second and back row Hannah O'Connor. Hannah, thanks for joining us again. It's been a few months since we've had you on the podcast.
Thanks a million, Neil. Thanks for having me back. It's great to be back.
It is, yeah, great to have you back. And the start of what's looking like a very exciting international season for Ireland's women rugby. I was out doing the media today, and as Hugh Hogan, the defence coach, pointed out, this game against France this weekend. This is the start of 10 games, a minimum 10 games. Who knows? Could be 11, 12, 13 if everything goes to plan, but minimum 10 games, and you'll see how the season goes after that. It's a very exciting kind of 6, 7, 8 months we have coming up.
100%. What an exciting calendar year it is for women's rugby. Like those days of you kind of living for the 5 games or so of Six Nations and then nothing else. And kind of it's built over the years to having your kind of November test matches into WXVs and into WXV1 last year. And now to have that, as you said, that exciting run up of a calendar year, with this being the kind of the beginning of hopefully something really special for everybody in a green jersey and for everybody getting to watch here as well. So yeah, it's exciting, definitely.
And like really enjoyable, I would say from a professional point of view, really enjoyable covering the team at the moment, because obviously you were there at the time as well. I remember maybe 2-3 seasons ago covering the team, and it was hard not to be asking questions that had negative slants on them, and if it was poor results on the pitch, it was issues off the pitch and stuff like that. And I did find it kind of not alarming, but kind of jarring in a good way today, being out there, and all the talk is about dealing with the expectations of the last 12 months, or kicking on further, or building towards a World Cup, and talking about the depth that's now there in the squad. It's nice to be able to kind of look at the Ireland women's team again and just be kind of focusing on the good aspects of the rugby.
Yeah, 100%. Like as I said, those couple of seasons ago, it was a very dark place to be. It was the most, the proudest of your life to be able to put on the green jersey, but it was always tinged during that period. As you said, it was a fairly dark time kind of on and off the pitch for us to try and get through. So it was a definite mix of emotion. So to see it kind of come out the other end, and like I know we talked about it pre the WXV ones, the pieces of the jigsaw being put together in terms of the backing being given by the IRFU, and David Humphrey's gone in and made that difference with it, and then been given the allocation of coaches, all those little pieces that from the outside mightn't look like a big deal, but to have different coaches within the different slots to be able to do their role and allow the girls to kind of literally just follow what's being kind of asked of them, and knowing that you're getting the highest quality stuff at the different areas is huge. Like, so yeah, as you said, to be able to kind of sit and talk about the games and kind of the expectation as being the height of kind of the concerns to deal with is a good place to be. So it's exciting, definitely.
And as I said just before we started recording, like I was reminded of being out there 12 months ago as well. And that was probably, it was the start of when this all started to turn upwards. And I was looking back on some of the notes from last year, because it just so happened, obviously, to be France in the opening game of the Six Nations away in Le Mans last year. And I looked at what Scott Beamon was saying before that game, and the message was the plan that day was to fire some shots at France and to kind of land a couple of blows here and there. And I think ultimately that's how that game went. But it is remarkable, kind of 12 months on, that both Hugh Hogan, the defence coach, and some of the players who were up for media today as well were talking about being there in the fight to potentially go and win it. They weren't talking about, we're going out and we're confident of beating this French team, because there has been a gap down the years. But there's definitely a confidence that the gap that was there 12 months ago is a hell of a lot smaller now than it would have been back then.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's the success and the confidence that the girls have had from the WXV1 and how well that went for them on the pitch. And I suppose that the counterbalance to that is how France didn't have quite as kind of a successful journey in that capacity. But I think, yeah, from hearing what you're saying about what the girls are talking about, they're very much aware that France are France, a lot like the men's team. The France you get showing up on a day is the typical French. You don't know what they're going to bring. They can bring that absolute jouet and just kind of absolutely play off the pitch, but also you're in with the shot if you can play your best game. And last year, as you said, the phrase was to fire the shots, and this year it's the girls know that they've kind of had that group, that are that core group together with each other for such a long period of time, with an injection of kind of new players into it. But there's been a big core group of them together under Scott and under these new coaches for a long time now, kind of bedding in what's there. So yeah, I definitely would think they're going up, and it's the added factor of having a home game against them. As you said, after traveling away last year to France, and to be able to come home now this year and go up to Belfast hopefully on Saturday, they'll definitely be feeling that if they can play to the best of their potential, they can definitely not only fire shots but be in with a real shout of it.
I am wondering, are you still in with those team meetings or something? Because Hugh Hogan was asked about France, and your exact words were his exact words: France are France.
Yeah, it's the same as the men, though, isn't it? Like, you come up against the French, and it's that like that confidence that they have in themselves. And I suppose they like, you don't know a lot about the French. I think I liked personally last year playing against them first game, because it works for both ways. You're playing against each other first, and you're only going off like the last Six Nations of footage, or like the WXV1 or whatever it was to have the footage. But you know that there's such a big gap between that footage coming out that so much could have changed in terms of line out, scrums, like set piece launchers, all this stuff. So you're kind of trying to guess what this player or this player might do, who they'll pick, and you don't really have a clue. Obviously, most of the French players play in France. It's not really a league that we hear too much about over here, or that we're exposed to too much over here compared to like the English players in the Prem over in England. But yeah, it's the unknown. But you got to kind of take the unknown and use it to your advantage at the same time, that you're kind of holding your cards close to your chest. A lot like the girls did when they went into WXV1 and came out with the blocks firing in that first game back in whatever it was, September, October. So there's that element to it too, that it can work definitely in your favor. So the girls will be hoping that the unknown will work for them as well as everything else.
Yeah, but what's interesting as well is there seems to be a good bit of known as well between the two teams, not only just from meeting in the Six Nations, but we were told today, for example, that during the WXV, Ireland and France actually trained together a couple of times leading up to the New Zealand game, Ireland's New Zealand game, and Ireland's USA game. In the weeks of those matches, the backlines ran opposite each other, the forwards did drills together. So there's obviously going to be a bit of knowledge there that is different to being in a match setting. And also, as you kind of mentioned, like we were joking about France being France and how it's similar, obviously, to the men's game, but even stylistically, and you look at just how I suppose some countries have a rugby culture, and France obviously play through scrum half like the the little general, Bourdain
Yeah.
Sansu is their Antoine Dupont, and
She
that's how
is
they play the game. And she's obviously the danger woman for France.
big time. She to say like she is just one of those. Like she is literally for us as the female version of Dupont when she's playing against you. You think that you have a hold of her, and all of a sudden she just appears. Like when you're on the pitch with her and she's in front of you, she's appearing out of nowhere. She's making space out of nothing. You can almost see what she's going to do to you to manipulate you before it happens, and she's still going to do it. So she's an incredible player, and yeah, she makes them tick, similar to Dupont for the males team, the men team. But like, yeah, it's kind of her along with the few key players that they have. They have a big injection of blood like coming in, but again, it's kind of the unknown of as to who they'll pick. Yeah. But that kind of unknown quantity is mashed well with some experience, but kind of similar to us in terms of like they've got a good experience in the pack in terms of their front three, same as the girls have with the Irish squad. So like there's a lot there that's consistent for the Irish women as well as the French women. So I think it'll be a really interesting battle. And as I said, the Belfast crowd and that home energy that brings is that there was nothing like it for what the French could bring in Le Mans, the loudness and the brass band element that they bring. So in the crowd in Belfast will be looking to do the same, and I'm sure they will.
Yeah, and let's not underestimate the Belfast factor as well, because it is actually becoming a good luck charm for this team. Like, you know, the Australia game last year, there was the Scotland game at the end of the previous Six Nations, and 2 years before that as well. Actually, a decent record up there.
100%. Yeah, I was only thinking that there before we came on. I was like, and that makes a big difference when you're going up, because you're spending like half your week up there in the build up, but your brain is just kind of constantly ticking along. Oh, when we were here, or do you remember? Like you do float back to those memories of like for the good and for the bad sometimes. So yeah, hot in the girls' mind would be that Australian game that they had and how energized they were from the crowd and everything that went on that day with the celebrations of the 150 years or whatever. But it's definitely something that helps, and it's, you know, 4G surface, nice quick surface. You're hoping for a nice day to add to it, but it's definitely something that adds a nice feel-good factor to it in terms of that fortress. Especially, I think, because there was that big debate when the games were getting moved around Ireland, is like, well, the men are staying in the one place, and you're making it your fortress, and you're making it your home, and you're making it like that anyone who comes here. But no, like I think both Cork in Musgrave and or Virgin Media and in up in Belfast, the two grounds have been, you know, really, really good places to go with, probably more, as you said, more fond memories up on Belfast. So yeah, hopefully that will work in our favour as well.
We kind of touched on it at the start. Obviously, it's just a huge year for women's rugby, but looking at Irish women's rugby specifically, because obviously we had the 2017 World Cup in Ireland, and ultimately it was like a missed opportunity to grow the game here. But you're not going to get a World Cup any closer to home than England this time round. The accessibility of the games for supporters going over there, even just time zone, and then smaller things like England probably being the biggest market for women's rugby at the moment. The crowds are going to be big. It's going to, I suppose, everything is going to look so much better outside of the rugby, even on TV, where you're going to have more people in the stands and bigger stadiums as well being used. It's a huge launch pad for the game in this country. And that's probably why this is such an important year, not just such an important Six Nations, but an important year.
Yeah, it's huge. Like, as you said, it gives you such opportunity, the fact that it's so close to home and has the ability for people to travel over. And yeah, as I think everybody felt that the 2017 one here on our own shores was a missed opportunity of kind of what came after it would not be what you'd expect or what you'd hope for in terms of the demise of how things went downhill before we've kind of resurfaced again to this stage. And it takes a long time to get that rebuild. So yeah, I think it's about capitalizing as best as possible on it. And I think the, you know, the IRFU putting someone like Lynn Cantwell within there is going to be huge for the game. I think she's you know, was obviously an incredible player in her time, but she gets it. You know, she understands what's involved in that, having been very closely involved obviously with the 2017 stuff, but just in terms of her knowledge of the game both on and off the pitch and how it runs and how it's what it takes to run it and run it well. I think there needs to be a kind of a, you know, obviously the Celtic Challenge is something that has been kind of dipped into in terms of trying to broaden the pathways there in terms of the game and grow the game in that way. And look, you know, commended for trying, but I don't think that's necessarily the answer. Like we've seen obviously over the last, having been involved in it myself last year, you're getting very one-sided games against some of these oppositions. And during this time, you're coming away from your club to play with girls who are obviously vying for places within a national squad. So you obviously see it as a step up, but then the opposition sometimes you'd be better off if you were, playing with your club and getting the top 4 tussles in between the top 4 clubs in Ireland to get a better quality of match as a showpiece for that kind of thing. So I think we've seen a little bit of that, where obviously the 2 Irish teams of the Clovers and the Wolfhounds were incredibly stacked with players. And you're not quite getting the same thing from the Welsh and from the Scottish teams, who are, a lot of theirs are like, very young kind of college players coming out, because of course a lot of their players play their rugby in the Prem, and that's where they're going to stay to get their high quality rugby. So for me personally, I'd love to see it that RFU invest more time in the AIL, because that's the grassroots rugby game. It's where, where the men's team come from and their pathways, and you see it and everybody being so proud of their club. And it's really where a lot of the girls within that system now have been in with the Irish, squad. It's where I first started my journey off to get myself to the next level of it. But you'd like to think that, they'd start to bed in a bit more time into that, and maybe go back to the way they had it of, splitting the league maybe a little bit to make it more competitive with your teams who can kind of tussle it out for top 5 places versus the bottom half, to allow people, because I think we've seen a lot this year in the IL of, concession of games because of that drought of players being taken from the smaller clubs who just can't survive it, as well as kind of lesser competitive matches, which, yourself, when you're playing those ones, those like 93-0s or, tipping on towards that, or over 50, you're not really getting the same for the girls in the Celtic Cup. You're not getting anything out of those games for yourself as a player, because you're no sooner setting up to get into shape and someone has made a break and scored, or there's nothing to be gained from them. So you understand them trying it and kind of delving into that way to try push things in the Celtic Cup way of trying to have a more, competitive feel to it. But I just don't think that the 3 countries are aligned as much on it as to what they're trying to do, thus resulting in maybe a bit of a one-sided matches from the Irish point of view, being able to dominate some games on that.
Is it a case that with the Celtic Challenge that they are trying to grow it a little bit faster than it's ready for? So obviously it's been going 3-4 years now, but obviously this year it's been pushed. It was pushed out to 10 rounds of games.
Yeah.
And obviously this year now, as you've kind of said, it has a significant impact on the AIL, because these 2 competitions are now running side by side. So if a player is playing in the Celtic Challenge on a weekend, she's not available obviously for her club at the weekend.
Yeah.
And we're seeing huge score lines, as you mentioned, with the Clovers and Wolfhounds. It was only the 2 of them that beat each other, and everyone else, they beat everyone else relatively comfortably.
Yeah.
There was one draw technically in there, but that was a game that was cancelled because of the storms. Yeah. But then the knock-on effect, obviously, as well with the AIL is we are seeing even wider score lines than that. You mentioned concessions of matches. I'm looking at the table now. 3 teams have been deducted points for conceding games. Suttonians twice, Galwegians and Cook as well. Yeah. So has the way the Celtic Challenge has grown, has that almost kind of taken away from both competitions?
Yeah, it kind of has, really. And it was flagged, these meetings were had pre the Celtic Challenge even coming out with clubs and stuff, and the IRFU sitting down with clubs, and it was said that, the numbers on paper of players in Ireland versus the amount of players you're trying to take away into that competition is just not going to work. You're not going to be able to marry the 2 together and then to kind of chunk more matches on this year. You get it, you understand the principle of it, and the girls who are in it, you understand the trying to level it up and bring people, and it's fantastic because you get to go into these HPC environments, whether it's down in Munster with the girls who are playing with the Clovers, or whether it's in the HPC in Dublin with the girls who are playing for the Wolfhounds, and you get that high level of coaching, you get that high level of kind of trainings that are that next step up to give you the feel, kind of the level up again, maybe, or level on a par, maybe with interprovincial sessions. But it just is to the detriment, as you said, to the club game. Neither now are getting fulfilled fixtures of it's been great for say the sevens girls to get them match minutes. Mm-hmm. Some people maybe who aren't as experienced with 15s game, you've seen all of them come back into the fray. People returning from injury, or just people even just to get minutes in the 15s game, which has been brilliant for that, obviously. But I'd argue that you could have had a massively competitive AIL season if you had left all those players within the club, and maybe have, I don't know, some form of whether it's training camps or kind of trial camps, or that kind of thing, where you had a tester for it to give people a feel for it and see what people are about. But if you were to split the AIL in 2 and make it like the men's, essentially AIL 1 and 1A and 1B, that you could have some cracking games. But as you said, it's a big year for the women's game in Ireland. There's going to be more eyes on it. If they're looking at the Irish women's team, they're looking at, we're looking at Christy Haney plays with Blackrock, or, you're looking at Dan O'Brien plays with Old Belvedere, and you're if you go down to watch a game, then the next season you want it to match and see the same standard of rugby as to where these girls have come from on the pathway. So yeah, I think there's a lot of room there to kind of stuff that can be fixed, but it's not to take away of the fantastic place that the girls are in now, because I don't want to taint it with that. But you'd like to think that there is room for the gap to be closed on both and try to find a place to marry the two together, to not just let the AIL game dwindle and the club game dwindle of women's rugby in Ireland, because that is, as I said, where most of us have come from growing with our club. So I'd like to think that there is a kind of a happy medium to be found of having those competitive games that brings people out and brings. We were down, say, last week, we played Railway Union in Sandymount, and we had, I'd say, about 30 girls come up from Kilkenny Rugby Club, and it was their first game ever to see women's play. They have obviously a women's team, I think, in their club, but they hadn't actually been to a game. So they came up on the day, the Leinster flags out, they had all their flags, all their gear on, they played at halftime and they had a ball. And it was their first time to see it. It was a great match. Like, we ended up the wrong side of it, so I wouldn't say it was a great match for me. But for them, say, to see something like that, I'd love to think that we could get to a place where the AIL had matches week in and week out like that. I think that would be my dream for it, but we'll see.
Yeah, for its relevance, I suppose, to this Six Nations campaign is the important thing then for the Irish coach's point of view. If you're building, obviously there are players in PWR, but for your Irish-based players who've been playing in that, is the important thing maybe to look at the Celtic Challenge, not so much in terms of what you are getting out of it, but equally what you're not getting out of it, and really kind of hone in training-wise on the things you haven't been able to kind of work on throughout that campaign. For example, maybe like if in a lot of games you're kind of scoring tries for fun, that, okay, defense is the big thing to be working on in training here to make sure that doesn't slip. So just to be kind of wary of what you are getting from the competition, but more so what you're not getting.
Yeah, I think that is. And like, look, Scott is in this game long enough that he'll, and the coaching ticket as well, they're incredibly experienced. They're not going to be under any illusions. Like, obviously they're going to want to promote it and as it is and give it a fair crack with what it is. But yeah, as I said, they're probably the best sessions they probably had, knowing how they did it last year, was probably the best sessions or in-house sessions they had against each other were probably the ones that they had. So yeah, it's just trying to find that happy medium with them. As I said, it's not to kind of dilute what is an exciting time, but you just love to see that little extra bit of the jigsaw being put together to make the women's game in Ireland as exciting. Like I said, watching the club game at the moment, like following, I said, that even in Division 1B with the men, of how ridiculous the scores are in terms of you couldn't keep up with who wins. And that's what you want. Like, you want to be able to go down to a match and be like, geez, I don't know who's going to win this, because it could be anybody's. Like, that's kind of the rugby you want to watch. So I'd like to think that we can get to that stage in the women's game too for everybody involved.
Yeah, the Division 1B and 2A in the men's AIL is just wild. And to be honest, even 1A this year with the top half of that table as well, it's absolutely bonkers. So looking at 2025, where, and we're looking at kind of where the team are now compared to where they left off after WXV. A brilliant campaign, obviously finishing second, beating New Zealand and USA and losing to Canada.
Yeah.
With that now comes an increased expectation into 2025 and a little bit more pressure, obviously, that goes along with it. But that's a healthy thing to be bringing on. How confident are you of the bunch in there? Because you know them fairly well at this stage. How confident are you that they'll be able to kind of pick up on that pressure and be able to roll with the confidence they have?
I think they'll massively, I have full backing that they'll be able to roll with that the expectation won't weigh too heavily on their shoulders. Like, as you mentioned there, the last like probably 2 or 3 years of like when it was in the doldrums, you hated it because you hated being the one to go in front of media. You hated getting the pity party. You hated getting asked the questions about it. You knew where we could be and where we were.
We hated asking the questions.
I know you did. I know you did. But it was like, who's going to be the lambs to slaughter to go out in front of them? So to be at that stage now where like the height of your concern is the expectation, I fully back the girls to be able to deal with that. They're confident in what they have and what they can do and what they can achieve. So like they'll be going out, as I said, so no more than last year to fire those shots, but now the kind of the world has had to sit up a little bit more and realize that, you know, we're not here to take part in it, that we're very much here to put our names on the board and see what we can achieve. So there'll definitely be a lot more kind of awareness from the other teams, and I suppose with that comes, you know, the awareness or the expectation. The other teams are going to be a bit more aware of all the various players that we have on offer too. So it's up to the girls to keep leveling up. But like, I think the competition for places within the squad will be massive. So that'll keep them on their toes alone from in-house sessions. So it'll be good.
Yeah, and speaking of the competition in the squad then, because it's interesting when you look at the squad for this Six Nations, on paper, probably a stronger squad than they actually went to Vancouver with a few months ago, because you look at some of the names in there. I mean, even Adele McMahon was in Vancouver, but she only got to play one game. Then you've Katie Corrigan missed out in the entire competition over there. She was brilliant in her first Six Nations last year. Avian Riley's back from injury. Sive McGrath is also available again, and Bavin Parsons could become available. We've been told kind of towards the end of the Six Nations, she's on the way back from that broken leg. So on paper, it's an even more competitive squad than they went to Vancouver with.
Yeah, it is. And as you said, like the idea of like being closer to home, I think with Vancouver, they were unlucky with a few injuries and having to kind of fly people out and fly people back. It's never as easy. And with a short kind of truncated competition like that, you can sometimes find yourself stretched. But yeah, as you said, the kind of the key cogs that were there in Vancouver are there, and you've added a few layers in of people maybe who weren't involved who bring something else as well. That, you've got Aoibhinn Riley there coming back from injury. There's all of a sudden there's 3 scrum halves up, really good scrum halves, 2 of whom obviously are club mates of mine. So I'm a bit more biased, but Molly is a cracking player, Molly Scuffle McCabe as well. So it's always the first week, or like the last few weeks building into Six Nations, are always the edgy ones, because you've all these training sessions, and France are to the forefront of your mind. The girls will have it up on the board that France in this many days, and the countdown is on. But you know that every training session you do in your selection is going towards that, and you're trying to get your foot in the door, and you're trying to put your hand up for a selection for that. So it could be anybody's guess as to who's getting selected, because there's such a variety of people in certain positions. Like, we have a hell of a lot of back rows there. Probably not as many kind of out and out second rows. Like, obviously Dorothy Wall has kind of transitioned over to that in the last couple of years and done a cracking job. You've had a few people there who've kind of been in and out to an injury. Like Ruth Campbell is obviously a really good young talent as well, and Fiona Chew, but they've kind of suffered with injuries over the last while. So there's been nobody kind of there that you could have been watching kind of their pathway kind of the last while. Ruth probably haven't played the next amount of rugby. And then you have a lot of back rows. Like, you have a lot of people down who would be their primary position, be back rows. So I would say we're probably going to see some people kind of changing over to kind of slot into that second row. So that'll be interesting to see who that is, and, covering those positions, and how that goes. Obviously there'll be, missing Sam through injury as well. Sam Monaghan, obviously, he'll be a big leader in terms of line out time. So that'll be interesting to see how that goes from that point of view. Front row are kind of, as they were with the same, and that's good as well. Like, obviously in any kind of front row, you want to have the same kind of bodies. As you said, Sive McGrath coming back from injuries will also bring a kind of an extra bit of depth there, which is great to see her back after a long layoff.
Strength. Talk to us about Niamh O'Dowd, actually, because you mentioned her in our kind of pre-pod notes, and I know she was someone we did speak a little bit about as well during the WXV, as maybe one of the lesser known players who really grasped her opportunity.
Yeah, I think she's definitely one I would keep an eye on for this Six Nations campaign. She definitely would be down as one of my ones to watch. I think just how she goes about her business, and she's been trucking away the last number of years, plying her trade in that front row and trying to get to grips with it. And they're very, as I think as every front row union within the men's game and the women's game, they're a very tight little group, and she would get on really well with Christy Haney, and they would kind of bounce off each other a lot. So she's come on leaps and bounds over the last few years, and from what I'm hearing, she's been flying at a training as well at the moment. Just kind of a front row, but with the ability and pace and speed of a back row. And she's just busy, keeps herself going. And she's a very funny character as well, which is always nice. She's gas. So with Noddy, as she's affectionately known as, but she's brilliant. I definitely think that her explosiveness and her power and how improved her scrum game has become, I would definitely say she is one to watch. Aoibhinn Riley being back, as I said, is another 9 to pick from. It's anyone's guess who's going to be up for that 9 jersey. As I said, her arrival back now is in a timely fashion as well. There's positions then, there's probably a bit skinnier in depth in terms of fullback with Emer Considine retiring. So it's going to be interesting to see who gets the nod there in terms of that jersey. So there's a few positions that we're really saturated in, and then a few positions that would be interesting to see what Scott decides to go with in terms of picking.
With fullback, who do you think would be leading that race? Is Stacey Flood?
It's hard to know, yeah, because I said I know a few people have kind of been in and out, and there was a few people who had injuries, whether they're long term or not. I'm not really sure, as I haven't really heard. But yeah, it's kind of a case of the sevens girls will have the raw pace, and a lot of them will have that kicking ability as well from the sevens game. So you're kind of looking at someone who can marry the both, but getting the positioning then is a kind of a whole other different kettle of fish. So I think they've kind of exposed. Obviously, Stacey's had a good run at it with the Wolfhounds in terms of getting a bit of match minutes there with the Celtic Challenge stuff, as has Maeve Dealey on the other side. So there's been a bit of mixing and matching. You can see they're obviously trialing a few people out to see. So yeah, those positions particularly, I think 9 and 15 and who he goes within front row and back row. And say, there's a few positions, like the centres, you kind of have, you have obviously probably the likes of Enya, Breen and Aoife Dalton, but then you've also got like Anna McGann and Katie Heffernan coming into that as well as others there who are putting their hand up.
Don't forget Eve Higgins.
Eve Higgins as well, of course. Yeah, like you've got so many, and like Eve is so versatile as well that you could put her anywhere. So it really is a case of, will they come up with any surprises in terms of positionally? Will anybody swap or anything like that? So it's going to be an interesting one. It's going to be an interesting one for sure. And as I said, the girls will be as nervy heading into this week as everybody watching, because it's really the unknown as to who the coaching team will go with for the first round out.
I don't want to like jump ahead at matches, and obviously France is an enormous enough challenge as it is. But from your knowledge of the squad, do you think that Italy away from home is going to be the game that probably has that huge circle around it, just based on what happened at the RDS last year?
I wouldn't say so. The girls, knowing of what it's like to be in there, your brain wouldn't even go to there. It's funny, like when it starts off, you become just consumed by France, and that's all you think about because it's the first game up. And then it kind of everything happens really quickly after that. So all of a sudden, your preview and review gets really condensed. So like they'll definitely want to get one up on Italy, but they definitely won't be thinking about that until the week comes. It won't be something in their mind to kind of get revenge or something like that, or to get one back on them. It'll definitely a case of see week to week how it goes. As much of a cliche and all as that is, you kind of do have to live week to week. Because as I said, there's so much to think about for each opposition that you can't really afford to get ahead of yourself. And then you're obviously waiting to see how everyone else goes in week one before kind of making any kind of judgments there on it. So it's always an interesting one with week one.
So, like, are we talking, to kind of wrap things up in terms of the wider tournament? Is it a big fight for Ireland to just try consolidate that top three position? I know there was a lot of talk today as well when we were out there that Wales, for example, there's a real unknown quantity around them because they've new coaching coming in at the moment. They had a disappointing year last year. You're expecting them to be a lot better. So what represents a solid Six Nations for Ireland to lead into the World Cup with?
I think they'll want to back up what they've done in WXV1. They'll want to back it up with solid performances that they can do themselves justice with. I feel like that they'll be very much thinking that if we can put in the performances that we did in WXV1 and layer them on back to back, that they'll be feeling that why don't they have a shout? They'll have shown that like the whole beat New Zealand thing, it shows that on your day, if you get things right, you can beat anybody. So they will know that, and they'll know that they have largely the same cohort of players to do that. So they'll take it game by game, but they'll definitely be feeling like, why not? It'll be an element of why can't we? So there's that confidence that's nice to it, but you are obviously have the unknown quantities with everybody else in terms of new coaching tickets. You've got new players, you've got, rotations happening elsewhere. Will people kind of try different things ahead of the World Cup coming up and all that kind of stuff? So it's that unknown of everything that it brings. But no, the girls will definitely be feeling they'll be wanting to show that they weren't a flash in the pan, that the whole of the Six Nations, the success last year that they had in terms of the qualifying and what happened WXV1, it's all that momentum. It's keeping momentum and making sure that everybody kind of joins on the green wave with them as they go.
The green wave that came up from a couple of players in today's press conference.
Yeah.
Actually, is that something in the team, the green wave?
Yeah, it is, but I'm not going to be the one to say too much about it. But yeah, it is. But it is what it's like. It sounds like, and it's a nice kind of. I said I'm definitely not going to be the one to give too much away in it.
Don't worry. I did follow up with one of the players to ask a little bit more about it, because I did hear a couple specifically mention the green wave.
And did they give you anything on it?
It was just I suppose just something that they've been kind of an internal kind of a reference point, I suppose, over the last couple of years.
There you go. That's what it is. It's an internal reference point. Yeah, but that's literally what it is, and it's kind of what it sounds like. But it's a nice way to kind of look at it, because as you said, like that, it is such a big year for women's rugby in the country that it's a nice kind of way of looking at it, of getting other people to join on. And what better way to do that than to put in performances, especially in those two games at home, to be able to get the crowd behind them and realize that the women's game is something to watch and is something to get behind, and hopefully that they can join them then for the World Cup journey that lies ahead of it then, when it's, as you said, so close to our shores as well, which is great.
All right, final bit. Give us a prediction for Saturday.
Ooh, I'm gonna say that it's going to be one of those good days, and it's going to come quite close. Like we saw France get rattled last year as well in kind of the early stages. So you're hoping to catch them out the gate. So I'd be hoping that I'm going to say the girls will win it by a score. I'm not going to put a score on it. I'm going to say we'll win it by a score.
Don't worry. I mean, you're making a bold enough prediction there. I'm not going to pin a score line on you. And thanks a million. A reminder, you can hear live commentary of Ireland against France on RTÉ Radio 1 Extra from 1 p.m. this Saturday. The second half will be live on RTÉ Radio 1 on Saturday Sport as well. Scotland and Wales then in the Women's Six Nations live on RTÉ Player Saturday afternoon from 4:35 p.m. And then in the URC, a lot of rugby on TV as well. Glasgow and Munster on Friday night on RT2 and RT Player. Then a double header on Saturday afternoon. Bulls against Leinster and Ospreys against Connacht, with the first of those games, or the coverage getting underway from 2:30 p.m. Hannah, brilliant speaking to you, and I'm sure we'll catch you again soon.
Thanks a million, Neil. Good to chat.